Northern Montana Territory, late November 1850. While neighboring Blackfeet families quickly erected standard single-hide tipis before the deep winter, Hunter Manyfeathers was still gathering materials in his 11th week of preparation, building a shelter with double walls and extra poles that consumed twice the hides and wood. His fellow hunters called it wasteful. The tribal elders shook their heads. Why use double the materials when standard tipis had worked for generations? Then the unprecedented Arctic surge of December 1850 arrived. Temperatures plunged to 42 degrees below zero with sustained winds of 30 miles per hour. The deepest cold in living memory that would test every shelter method on the Great Plains. Standard tipis recorded interior temperatures of 28 degrees below zero. Families shivered in frozen sleeping bags as condensation turned to ice on the inner walls. One tipi collapsed entirely under the snow weight, but Manyfeathers' double-walled tipi maintained interior temperatures of 6 degrees above zero, using half the fuel while keeping 11 people warm and dry through the entire brutal freeze. What did this Blackfeet hunter understand about wind, heat, and insulation that modern camping gear manufacturers still haven't figured out? Manyfeathers crouched beside the Elk River, watching the ice crystals form along the shoreline as dawn broke over the November landscape of 1850. At 42 years old, his weathered hands moved methodically as he selected the straightest lodgepole pines from the timber he had been gathering for weeks. Each pole needed to measure exactly 20 feet in length, and he had already identified 16 that met his exacting standards. The other hunters in his Piakani band had completed their teepee construction days earlier using the traditional 14 poles of 18 feet each, but Manyfeathers continued his deliberate preparation. The memory of the winter of 1842 burned clearly in his mind. He had been 14 then, helping his father secure their standard teepee when the unprecedented cold struck. Temperatures had plummeted to 38 degrees below zero for 5 consecutive nights, accompanied by wind gusts exceeding 25 miles per hour from the northwest. 3 children in their band developed frostbite when a tipi collapsed inward from accumulated snow on the pole frame. The single buffalo hide covering had conducted the bitter cold directly through to the interior, and the fully open smoke flaps had created a relentless draft that pulled their precious warmth straight up and out into the frozen darkness. That experience had taught Manyfeathers to observe what others accepted without question. Over the years, he had spent countless nights studying how warm air moved within their shelters, noting how it rose quickly to the apex and escaped while cold air rushed in at ground level. He watched condensation form on the inner walls when warm breath met the frozen hide, then freeze into sheets that dropped ice flakes onto sleeping blankets. He had measured temperatures with a simple mercury thermometer borrowed from fur traders, recording interior readings that often dropped to within 10 degrees of the outside air. Red Wolf approached through the morning mist, carrying his own completed tipi poles over his shoulder. At 35, he commanded respect as one of the band's most successful trackers, having led 6 previous winters without losing camp members or resources. His teepee followed the generations-old pattern, 14 poles forming a base diameter of 14 feet and standing 15 feet high when assembled into the familiar cone shape. "You waste time with extra poles," Red Wolf said, examining Manyfeathers' longer timber. "We follow the herds tomorrow. Your heavy lodge will slow the march." Manyfeathers continued stripping bark from a particularly straight pole. Heavy preparation prevents heavy loss. "The old way has kept us warm for generations," Red Wolf insisted. "Single hide, open flaps, central fire. Why complicate what works?" But Manyfeathers had already begun implementing his modifications. Behind his selected campsite, Buffalo hides lay stretched and drying, not the single covering that tradition demanded, but enough material for a double-walled system. The outer hide would form the weather barrier, while an inner lining of tanned elk hide and heavy wool blankets would hang 4 inches inside the main poles. This would create a 3-inch dead air gap around the perimeter up to 5 feet in height, with the lining suspended 6 inches above ground level to allow cold air circulation beneath. 2 Rivers, the respected elder and firekeeper, emerged from the tree line carrying an armload of kindling. At 46, his authority on winter lodging was rarely questioned. His father and grandfather had both held the firekeeper role, and he had overseen successful winter encampments for 25 years. "Since my father's father, we have used single-skin tipis," 2 Rivers declared, setting down his wood beside Many Feathers' growing fuel pile. "You fix what is not broken. Those extra hides could shelter another family." Many Feathers gestured toward his planned hearth site, where he had already begun arranging stones for a fire pit 4 feet in diameter with raised rock walls 12 inches high. A larger hearth burns steadier. Steady heat requires less fuel. "More wood, more hides, more work." 2 Rivers shook his head. "We are hunters, not lodge builders." The criticism stung because Many Feathers understood their perspective. His method would require approximately 400 pounds of split lodgepole pine, enough fuel for 40 hours of continuous burning at roughly 300,000 BTU per hour. The other hunters carried half that amount, confident they could gather additional wood during the march. His double hide system would consume nearly 1,200 square feet of treated buffalo hide compared to the 800 square feet of a standard covering. As word of his preparation spread through the temporary camp, the mockery began in earnest. Hunters passing his construction site called him the winter fool behind his back. Children giggled at the sight of his oversized pole frame. Even the women preparing traditional single-wall tipis questioned his judgment openly. Gray Eagle, the camp chief overseeing their winter migration, stopped to observe Many Feathers' work on the first day of December. At 50, his leadership had successfully guided 10 winters without losing families to exposure. "Our camp must move with the herds," Gray Eagle stated firmly. "Your method anchors us to one place, while opportunity passes." Many Feathers secured the inner lining to the pole frame, ensuring the proper 4-inch gap between materials. Opportunity means nothing to frozen hands. The completed structure rose 18 feet into the crisp air, its base encompassing 154 square feet of floor space. The adjustable smoke flaps could be modified from fully open to 30% coverage using wooden poles, allowing precise control of the draft that had defeated so many standard tipis. The raised hearth would radiate heat more efficiently, while the double wall system promised to trap and circulate warm air rather than surrendering it to the relentless wind. As the last daylight faded on December 1st, Many Feathers kindled the first fire in his stone-lined pit. The flames reflected off the inner elk hide lining, while the outer buffalo hide shed the evening's first snowflakes. Around the camp circle, 7 other tipis stood ready in traditional configuration, their single walls and open flaps presenting familiar silhouettes against the darkening sky. The weather signs suggested a brutal test was approaching. Cloud formations indicated a northern Arctic surge would arrive within 48 hours, bringing temperatures that would challenge every shelter method on the Great Plains. Many Feathers added another split log to his fire and settled back against his thick buffalo hide bedding. Tomorrow would begin the march toward the elk wintering grounds, and within days, the true measure of his preparation would be revealed. The Arctic surge arrived on the morning of December 3rd, driving temperatures down to 30 degrees below zero by dawn. Many Feathers stirred his fire and checked the mercury thermometer he had positioned near his sleeping area. The reading showed 14 degrees above zero inside his double-walled tipi. He wrapped his blanket around his shoulders and stepped outside to find Red Wolf emerging from the standard tipi nearest his own. Red Wolf's face bore the telltale flush of someone who had spent the night fighting cold. Ice crystals clung to his mustache, and his breath formed thick clouds in the bitter air. "How did your fire burn?" Many Feathers asked quietly. "Burned through 150 pounds of wood," Red Wolf replied, stamping his feet to restore circulation. "Had to reload twice after midnight. Inside measured 8 degrees below at sunrise." His voice carried a note of concern that had not been present during the previous days of mockery. Many Feathers nodded toward his own fuel pile. The night had consumed approximately 150 pounds of split pine, but his fire had burned steadily without requiring middle-of-the-night attention. The double wall system had retained heat so efficiently that the inner lining remained warm to the touch, even as the outer buffalo hide crackled with frost. By midday, the wind had increased to 18 miles per hour with gusts reaching 22. Snow began falling in thick flakes that accumulated rapidly on the tipi covers. Many Feathers observed how the snow slid cleanly off his steep outer wall, the natural oils in the buffalo hide preventing ice formation. The neighboring standard tipis began showing signs of stress as snow adhered to their surfaces, creating additional weight on the pole frameworks. Two Rivers approached during the afternoon, his usual confidence replaced by methodical concern. "The children in Swift Hawk's lodge woke shivering twice," he reported. Their blankets collected frost that fell from the inner walls. Many Feathers examined the visible condensation patterns on the nearby standard tipis. Warm breath and body heat were meeting the cold inner surfaces and freezing immediately, creating sheets of ice that accumulated throughout the night. When morning fires warmed the air slightly, these ice layers partially melted and dripped onto bedding and supplies. "The single wall conducts cold directly through," Many Feathers explained, running his hand along his own inner lining. "This cloth stays dry because the cold stops at the outer hide." The temperature continued dropping through December 4th and 5th. Snow accumulated to 2 inches, then 4, then 6. Wind gusts reached 22 miles per hour consistently, creating drifts around the tipi bases. Many Feathers watched Red Wolf and 2 other hunters working frantically to reinforce their pole frameworks as the accumulated snow weight began causing structural problems. In Running Deer's tipi, one of the 18-foot poles developed a noticeable bend under the combined load of snow and ice formation. The bend created a weak point that threatened the entire framework's stability. Running Deer and his wife Swift Hawk spent an hour digging around the tipi base and shaking snow from the covering, but within hours the accumulation returned. Many Feathers' larger framework showed no such stress. The 20-foot poles distributed the load more effectively, and the steep angle of his outer covering shed snow naturally. More importantly, his controlled ventilation system prevented the moisture buildup that was creating ice weight on the other structures. On the evening of December 5th, Red Wolf appeared at Many Feathers' entrance flap accompanied by 2 Rivers. Both men carried the subdued expressions of hunters facing an unexpected challenge. "Your fire burns smaller but longer," Red Wolf admitted. "Your walls stay dry while ours drip ice water." 2 Rivers gestured toward the fuel pile beside Many Feathers' tipi. "You planned more wood, but you use less each night. How is this possible?" Many Feathers invited them to sit beside his hearth and observe the air circulation patterns. The fire drew cold air in through the gap beneath the inner lining, warmed it gradually as it rose along the outer wall within the dead air space.
then circulated the heated air back down behind the inner lining into the living space. This created a continuous warming cycle that required less fuel input while maintaining higher interior temperatures. The air moves in a circle, he demonstrated, by releasing a pinch of ash that drifted upward near the outer wall, then curved back down along the inner surface. It does not escape immediately through the smoke hole. The two men studied this circulation pattern with growing understanding. Their single-wall tipis allowed warm air to rise directly to the apex and exit, while cold air rushed in at ground level to replace it. This created a constant draft that consumed fuel without providing sustained warmth. That night, temperatures plummeted to 38 degrees below zero. Wind sustained at 20 miles per hour with gusts reaching 30. The mercury in Many Feathers' thermometer showed 18 degrees above zero at 6 in the morning, while Red Wolf reported his interior had dropped to 15 degrees below. More critically, the fuel consumption difference had become stark. Many Feathers burned 140 pounds of wood through the night while maintaining comfortable warmth. Red Wolf's group consumed nearly 250 pounds trying to achieve barely survivable conditions. Two Rivers visited again after breakfast, his weathered face showing the strain of managing fuel supplies for the entire camp. At this rate of burning, we exhaust our wood stores in 5 days, he calculated. Your method uses less fuel, but keeps warmer temperatures. The numbers favor your approach. Many Feathers added split pine to his fire and adjusted the smoke flaps to maintain optimal draft control. Outside, the wind continued its relentless assault on the camp, but inside his double-walled shelter, the air remained still and warm. The test of his innovation was intensifying, and the evidence was accumulating in measurements that could not be argued away. The weather showed no signs of moderating, and the fuel crisis in the standard tipis was becoming critical. Tomorrow would bring even harsher conditions, and the survival advantage of his method would soon become undeniable. The mercury dropped to 42 degrees below zero on the evening of December 6th, accompanied by sustained winds of 20 miles per hour that drove the wind chill into territory that could kill exposed skin within minutes. Many Feathers checked his thermometer at 6 in the morning and recorded an interior temperature of 6 degrees above zero. His fuel consumption had increased to 185 pounds overnight, but the double-wall system continued providing livable conditions. Red Wolf's situation had become desperate. His standard tipi recorded an interior temperature of 28 degrees below zero at dawn. Frost covered every surface inside the shelter, including the sleeping blankets that had absorbed moisture from breath and body heat throughout the night. When Red Wolf's 14-year-old son, Elk Feather, attempted to tend the fire, his fingertips went numb within 10 minutes, despite wearing hide mittens. We burned 400 pounds of wood and still woke to ice on our blankets, Red Wolf reported when he visited Many Feathers after sunrise. His voice carried exhaustion from a night spent feeding an insatiable fire that provided little warmth. The fuel disappears, but the cold remains. Buffalo Knife's teepee had developed more serious structural problems during the night. Two of his 18-foot poles bent inward 6 inches under the combined weight of accumulated snow and ice formation on the outer hide. The deformation reduced his interior height by 4 inches and narrowed the floor space by 10%. His family had spent hours before dawn clearing snow from around the base and shaking the covering to prevent total collapse. Many Feathers observed the fundamental failure occurring in the single-wall designs. The hide coverings acted as thermal conductors, transferring interior heat directly to the sub-freezing exterior environment. Warm air generated by the fires rose immediately to the apex and escaped through the fully open smoke holes, while replacement air rushed in at ground level already chilled to dangerous temperatures.
The continuous air exchange consumed fuel without building sustainable warmth. His double wall system operated on entirely different principles. The dead air space between the outer buffalo hide and inner elk hide lining created thermal resistance equivalent to adding significant insulation value around the perimeter. The adjustable smoke flaps allowed him to control the chimney effect, slowing the escape of heated air so it circulated longer within the living space before exiting. Two rivers appeared at mid-morning carrying grim calculations. At current consumption rates, 5 tipis will exhaust their fuel supplies within 2 days, he announced. Swift Hawk's child developed early frost nip on his toes, despite sleeping in blankets rated for 20 degrees below zero. The 8-year-old boy named Little Bear had awakened crying from cold, despite being wrapped in multiple layers of hide and wool. Swift Hawk had discovered white patches on 3 toes indicating the onset of frostbite. The family's interior temperature had dropped to 35 degrees below zero, creating conditions where body heat could not maintain circulation to extremities. Many Feathers adjusted his smoke flaps to 30% open area, reducing the draft while maintaining sufficient ventilation to clear smoke. This modification allowed warm air to accumulate in the upper portion of his teepee before slowly circulating downward along the inner lining. The technique required precise balance. Too little ventilation would fill the space with smoke, while too much would waste heat. By afternoon, Gray Eagle made an unprecedented decision. He approached Many Feathers with a request that acknowledged the failure of traditional methods. 2 families need shelter tonight. Their poles bend. Their fires consume wood without warming. Their children suffer. The camp chief's admission represented more than practical necessity. It challenged generations of accepted wisdom about winter shelter construction. Gray Eagle had successfully led 10 winters using standard methods. But the extreme conditions of December 6th had revealed the limitations of conventional approaches. That evening, Red Wolf and his family joined Many Feathers inside the double-walled tipi. The interior space, designed for 5 occupants, now accommodated 11 people. Many Feathers increased his fuel load to 300 pounds for the night, still significantly less than what a single standard tipi had been consuming. The morning of December 7th revealed the effectiveness of the expanded arrangement. Interior temperature measured 2 degrees above zero at 6 in the morning despite housing more than twice the intended occupancy. The additional body heat retained by the insulation system had actually improved efficiency. Red Wolf's son Elk Feather recorded no numbness in his extremities and reported sleeping through the night without interruption. Meanwhile, the remaining standard tipis struggled with increasingly critical conditions. One teepee's outer hide developed an ice crust half an inch thick that prevented proper snow shedding. The accumulated weight bent 2 poles inward by 6 inches, forcing the occupants to prop the framework with spare lodge poles to prevent complete collapse. Buffalo Knife's family faced the most severe crisis. Their teepee's structural integrity had deteriorated to the point where collapse seemed inevitable. The bent poles created gaps in the wall that allowed direct wind penetration, while the deformed shape disrupted proper smoke evacuation. They had burned nearly 500 pounds of wood, attempting to maintain survivable conditions, exhausting their fuel reserves 2 days ahead of schedule. Many Feathers extended his shelter to Buffalo Knife's family on the night of December 8th. 13 people now occupied his double-walled teepee, pushing the system beyond its designed capacity, but still maintaining interior temperatures that preserved life and health. The fuel consumption rose to 320 pounds overnight, yet this total remained less than what 2 standard tipis had been burning individually. The stark mathematics of survival had become undeniable. Many Feathers' method provided superior thermal performance while consuming fewer resources, even when sheltering excess occupants from failed traditional structures. The innovation that had been mocked as wasteful excess had become the difference between survival
and catastrophe. Snow depth reached 14 inches by December 11th, and the sustained wind gusts of 25 to 30 miles per hour created drifts that buried the lower portions of several tipis. The ambient temperature remained locked between 40 and 45 degrees below zero, creating conditions that challenged the fundamental assumptions of plains winter survival. Running deer's tipi suffered complete structural failure during the night of December 10th. The accumulated ice weight on his outer hide, now nearly 3/4 of an inch thick, exceeded the load capacity of his 18-foot pole framework. Two primary supports snapped at stress points where repeated bending had weakened the wood fiber. The collapse occurred at 3 in the morning, trapping Running Deer, his wife Swift Hawk, and their 8-year-old son, Little Bear, beneath the frozen hide covering. The family spent 30 minutes digging their way out through accumulated snow and tangled poles. Little Bear emerged with blue-tinged lips and uncontrollable shivering, despite being wrapped in buffalo robes throughout the ordeal. Swift Hawk discovered that their winter food supplies, dried elk meat and pemmican stored in hide containers, had frozen solid during the collapse, making immediate consumption impossible without extended thawing near a fire. Many Feathers was awakened by the commotion and immediately invited the displaced family into his shelter. The double-walled tipi now housed 16 people, far exceeding its design capacity of 5. He adjusted his fuel management to accommodate the additional body heat load, increasing the wood consumption to 350 pounds for the night while carefully monitoring the smoke flap settings to maintain proper ventilation. The morning of December 11th revealed interior temperatures of 4 degrees above zero despite the overcrowding. Little Bear showed no signs of frostbite progression, and his normal coloration returned within an hour of entering the heated space. The family's frozen food supplies thawed completely when placed near the stone-lined hearth, demonstrating how the consistent interior warmth preserved both human life and essential resources. Two Rivers conducted a systematic assessment of the remaining standard tipis during the morning hours. 3 of the original 7 shelters had developed structural problems serious enough to threaten occupant safety. Ice formation on the interior walls had reached thicknesses of up to 1 inch in some areas, creating additional weight while simultaneously reducing insulation effectiveness. The ice layers absorbed heat energy during their formation, then conducted cold directly through to the living spaces. Buffalo Knife's tipi presented the most dangerous conditions. His bent pole framework had created gaps in the wall, covering that allowed wind to penetrate directly into the interior. These air leaks prevented the accumulation of any warm air zone, regardless of fuel consumption. His family had burned 600 pounds of wood over 2 nights, while maintaining interior temperatures that never rose above 20 degrees below zero. The old methods fail when the cold exceeds their limits, Buffalo Knife admitted when he approached many Feathers seeking shelter. His weathered face showed the exhaustion of fighting an unwinnable battle against physics. Your method works because it understands what cold does to wood and hide. Gray Eagle made the decision to abandon 2 of the most damaged standard tipis entirely. The bent poles and ice-loaded coverings had created structures that consumed fuel without providing survivable conditions. He directed the displaced families to join Many Feathers shelter, bringing the total occupancy to 21 people within a space designed for 5. The extreme overcrowding tested the limits of Many Feathers' system, but the fundamental design principles continued to function. The dead air insulation gap maintained its thermal barrier effect. The controlled ventilation prevented dangerous carbon monoxide buildup, despite the increased fire requirements. The stone-lined hearth radiated heat efficiently throughout the expanded living space. Fuel consumption increased to 400 pounds overnight to maintain interior temperatures above freezing for the 21 occupants. This total remained less than what 3 standard tipis had been burning individually while failing to provide adequate warmth. The mathematical advantage of the double wall system became undeniable when calculated per person, approximately 19 pounds of wood per individual compared to the 50 to 60 pounds the standard tipis required. Tall woman and her sister Running Fox, who had initially helped construct the traditional shelters, spent December 12th processing hides and preparing food within Many Feathers' teepee. They reported that their work efficiency increased dramatically in the stable thermal environment. Tasks that had required frequent interruptions for warming hands and managing frozen materials could now be completed without pause. The walls that breathe hold the warmth, Tall Woman observed, noting how the inner lining remained dry and flexible, while the outer hide managed moisture and wind. The ones that shiver steal our time and strength. The psychological impact of the shelter's success extended beyond mere survival metrics. Children who had spent days huddled in inadequate warmth began playing and laughing within Many Feathers' space. Adults who had been focused entirely on fuel management and fire tending could return attention to essential winter tasks like equipment repair and food preparation. White Otter, the visiting Cree hunter, studied the double wall construction with professional interest. His own experience with boreal forest sheltering methods allowed him to recognize the sophisticated engineering principles at work. The thermal dynamics, moisture management, and structural integrity represented innovations that could be adapted for different climatic conditions. By December 13th, the immediate crisis had stabilized. Many Feathers' tipi housed the majority of the camp's population while consuming fewer resources than the original 7 standard structures had required. The temperature began moderating slightly, rising to 38 degrees below zero, but the fundamental lesson remained clear. Traditional methods had reached their performance limits, while innovation had provided a survival margin that saved lives. The success carried implications far beyond a single winter storm. The accumulated evidence, measurable temperatures, fuel consumption data, structural integrity, and health outcomes would influence shelter construction decisions for years to come. The Arctic siege broke on December 14th as wind shifted from the northwest to a gentler southern pattern. Temperatures rose to 25 degrees below zero by midday, the first measurable warming in 8 days. Many Feathers began the careful process of transitioning his overcrowded shelter back to normal occupancy as families assessed the possibility of reconstructing their damaged tipis. Buffalo Knife and his family were the first to attempt rebuilding. They salvaged usable poles from their collapsed framework and acquired replacement hides from families whose shelters had suffered less structural damage. This time, Buffalo Knife incorporated a modified inner lining system, suspending wool blankets 3 inches inside his primary poles to create a reduced dead air gap extending 4 feet up from ground level. His first night in the reconstructed shelter recorded interior temperatures of 8 degrees above zero, when ambient conditions measured 30 degrees below, demonstrating the practical adoption of Many Feathers' thermal principles. Running Deer took a different approach to his reconstruction. Having lost 2 poles in the collapse, he opted to build an entirely new framework using longer supports. He acquired 16 poles of 19 feet each, creating a structure intermediate between the traditional design and Many Feathers' full modification. His inner lining extended to 5 feet in height with a 4-inch dead air gap, and he incorporated adjustable smoke flaps that could be partially closed during extreme weather events. Red Wolf spent 3 days studying the thermal circulation patterns within Many Feathers' tipi before beginning his own modifications. He observed how the controlled ventilation created distinct airflow zones, cold air entering beneath the inner lining, warming as it rose through the dead air space, then circulating back down behind the lining to heat the occupancy zone. This understanding allowed him to design his own system with confidence in the underlying physics.
Two Rivers documented the fuel consumption differences throughout the crisis period for presentation to the band council. His calculations showed that Many Feathers' method, even when housing excess occupants, had consumed 40% less wood per person than the standard tipis. More significantly, the double wall system had maintained livable interior conditions, while traditional methods had failed entirely during the most extreme temperatures. The psychological transformation within the camp proved as dramatic as the thermal performance data. Hunters who had initially mocked Many Feathers' extensive preparations now sought detailed instruction in double wall construction techniques. They asked specific questions about pole selection, hide preparation, lining suspension methods, and smoke flap adjustment procedures. The practical success had converted skeptics into students. Gray Eagle convened a formal council session in late December to discuss the implications of the shelter crisis. The camp chief acknowledged that traditional methods had proven inadequate for extreme conditions, and that innovation deserved serious consideration rather than automatic rejection. He proposed that future winter migrations include contingency plans for severe weather events that exceeded the capacity of standard shelters. White Otter prepared to carry the double wall techniques back to his Cree companions near the boreal forest edge. His own experience during the crisis had demonstrated the method's effectiveness in conditions similar to those encountered during extended northern hunts. He sketched detailed diagrams of the lining suspension system and documented the specific measurements that had proven most effective. When the band departed their December campsite on the 22nd, 11 people emerged from Many Feathers' teepee showing no signs of cold-related injury or illness. Their equipment remained dry and functional. Their food supplies had been preserved at proper temperatures, and their energy levels remained adequate for the continued winter hunt. In contrast, the families from collapsed or inadequate standard tipis required 2 additional days of recovery before resuming travel. The Spring Buffalo grounds of 1851 provided the setting for a comprehensive review of the winter's events. Tribal elders from 3 neighboring Piakani bands attended the gathering, drawn by reports of the innovative shelter that had prevented casualties during unprecedented cold. Many Feathers demonstrated the construction sequence, from initial pole selection through final smoke flap adjustment, for an audience of experienced builders. Two Rivers addressed the assembled council with a formal acknowledgement of his changed perspective. I looked at where we sheltered, and I saw the wind win. I looked at the new lodge, and I saw our children warm. I will no longer mock when preparation speaks truth. His statement carried particular weight due to his long-standing role as firekeeper and shelter authority. The documentation process extended beyond oral testimony. Several band members had maintained detailed records of temperatures, fuel consumption, and structural performance throughout the crisis. These measurements provided objective evidence that supported the adoption of double-wall techniques for extreme weather situations. Young hunters in their 20s began incorporating modified lining systems into their own tipi construction during the summer of 1851. They experimented with different materials, gap dimensions, and ventilation configurations to optimize the thermal performance for various conditions. The innovation had sparked a broader examination of shelter engineering principles. Elk Feather, Red Wolf's son, who had experienced both the crisis in the standard teepee and the warmth of Many Feathers' shelter, became an advocate for the new methods among his peer group. At 15, he possessed both practical experience with the construction techniques and vivid memories of the life-threatening conditions that had made innovation necessary. By the winter of 1852, 5 families within the band had adopted complete double-wall systems for their primary tipis. Another 8 families incorporated partial modifications such as interior lining sections, adjustable smoke flaps, or enhanced fuel management strategies. The measured results consistently showed
improved thermal performance and reduced resource consumption compared to unmodified traditional designs. The legacy of many Feather's innovation extended beyond immediate practical applications. His success demonstrated that traditional knowledge could be enhanced through careful observation and systematic experimentation without abandoning core cultural values. The double-wall tipi represented evolution rather than revolution, building upon generations of accumulated wisdom while addressing the limitations revealed by extreme conditions.